brands and products, thousands of them, from our present and from our past. Have you ever looked, really looked, at the hundreds of different packaged items you use and throw away every day, and thought about how they all came into being, about what they all mean? Do any of us really take much notice of the foods, sweets, cleaners and soaps that take up so much space in our homes, our cupboards, and indeed our lives? How many of us actually know when the Mars bar first arrived, or what people used before washing up liquid appeared in the 1950s? Or what was responsible for the inevitable rise of the branded breakfast? What do all these packs and products tell us about ourselves? Together, they reveal an extraordinary insight into our collective history. And yet when we finish with them, they become rubbish and we instinctively throw them away. Here we are in this palace of products, and we're about to take a fascinating journey into our throwaway history. Hundreds of brands that we engage in every day. And yet, what's the story behind them, and how have they transformed our lives? This amazing story has been evolving since Victorian times. Technological changes, innovations, many small steps. But what does it all add up to? A massive consumer revolution.
Take me back to those good old days. Sweets and treats and jars full of heaven.
This revolution was made possible by many individuals who had great abilities, vision and energy. There was a Mr. Coleman, a Mr. Hartley, a Mr. Robertson. There was a Mr. Heinz and a Mr. Kellogg. There was even a Mr. Bird and a Mr. Birdseye. And let's not forget a Mr. Tate and a Mr. Lyle. And a Mr. Kipling? No, he didn't actually exist, but he does make exceedingly good cakes. Just look at how far back some of these brands go. Twinings was around over 300 years ago. Guinness was already being brewed 250 years ago. The Coleman's Bull's Head emblem first appeared in 1855, as did the famous Red Triangle of Bass. Mr. Rose launched his lime juice in 1867, and it's still on the shelves today, looking similar, but now in a plastic bottle. And look how the Lyle's Golden Syrup tin has barely changed since it was first sold in 1885. Brasso still retains its 1905 Sunburst. Many of today's familiar chocolate treats go back further than you think. These came out in the 1930s and still retain their visual flavour from that time. You may not actually see it, but this place is stuffed full of history. And what we're going to do now is gather together thousands of pieces of a jigsaw and put them together to create a massive picture of which we're all a part.
When you do see all of these brands from years ago that you obviously were part of your life at the time, you just took them for granted, and then you kind of, even though it's not that long ago, 20 years, 25 years, it's weird because every one of those things starts to evoke memories of not just the product but where you were and what you were doing when those things were just what were in the shops.
Seeing the objects from a time maybe 40, 45 years ago is just really moving.
I see all these things and they bring back so many memories from my childhood.
For every brand that's still with us today, there have been many others that have had a glorious heyday and yet have now disappeared off British shelves, though some are still alive and kicking in other countries. And yet, because of that huge emotional bond we once had with them, we still retain those fond memories for those brands.
Every day when I finished work and got to Waterloo Station, before catching the commuter train, I always had a Lion's fruit pie. And I think my favourite was blackberry and apple.
Lion's individual fruit pies, they were delicious.
You got it all to yourself. It was an individual pie. You didn't have to cut it, you didn't have to share it. You opened it and it was all yours.
And I had two favourites, apple and apricot. And the big choice, of course, was which one to buy. And I would buy them in the afternoon and eat them secretly when I was hungry.
Well, the individual fruit pies made by Lions were very important to us because we were scouts. And when you went with a packed lunch on your hike, the individual fruit pie was de rigueur. You had to have that.
It was easy to hold because it had a strip of paper, sort of greaseproof inside, so you could hold it with your dirty hands.
Like so many brands, the secret of Lion's individual fruit pies was their consistency. The pies were always that same beloved square of gooey wonderfulness. The essence of this product stayed the same, and that's why fans loved it. In fact, in 1968, when the name was changed to Harvest, and the pies became horror of horrors round instead of square, that bond with the brand was broken.
Actually, I should warn you, you may experience a scary moment or two as our story unfolds. These brands and products really do pack a powerful nostalgic punch.
I can remember Old Spice always being given to my father as a present at Christmas, and it had a particularly memorable smell and really brought back memories of those Christmases, you know, when my dad was around.
The distinctive shape and smell of Old Spice always reminded me of my grandfather, and the first aftershave that I bought was Old Spice, specifically because that was the one that I recognized. And it always just sort of brought me home. I don't wear it anymore, but it's still, whenever I smell it, that's my grandfather for me.
It is perhaps surprising how big a part these throwaway items have played in our lives. Like the wallpaper in our home, they're always there, to the point where we almost stop noticing them. We seldom appreciate their true significance, or understand where they've come from. And when we've finished with them, we simply throw them away. As life moves on, the brands we once used sink quietly away into our subconscious. Sometimes we come across them again 10, 20, 30 years later, and suddenly we're reminded of that moment or smell or person once again, transported back into the forgotten emotions of our personal past, often our childhood.
Suddenly seeing a packet of crisps from the 1970s, my childhood, it's an amazing revelation. Not only does it bring back the taste and the flavour of those crisps, but transports you back to a moment, in my case, buying them at a school tuck shop where they were sold out of the box.
So how did we come to be surrounded by such a cornucopia of packaged products? How has it all happened, and when did it start? The driving forces behind this package of ours were already in play 200 years ago, and they've been gathering momentum ever since. The first is our insatiable desire as human beings to have things better, easier, and quicker. The second is the advance of technology. The Industrial Revolution completely changed society. New techniques and innovations allowed us to bring together ingredients from all over the world and to package and preserve them in more effective ways. As each new advance was made possible, manufacturers looked at ways of introducing it to the public. For example, the development of the toothpaste tube enabled instant paste to be squeezed directly onto a toothbrush, saving us the inconvenience of having to mix it up ourselves. And of course, we then needed an attachment on the tube to stop us losing the cap. This was just one small moment in a never-ending spiral of progress to satisfy our constant need for more. More convenience, more speed, more quality, more variety, more everything.
In Victorian times, factories were growing bigger and bigger, producing all types of paraphernalia, from pens to pottery, from pills to potions and every type of powder. Indeed, a shopping basket of goodies was just growing and growing, and we were more excited for it.
As the factories got bigger, more people came from the countryside to work in the towns and cities. Britain evolved from a rural economy into an urban one. The canal system allowed goods to travel further and more economically. And then in the 1840s, the railways enabled them to move faster and further still. During the 19th century, we were learning the names of the prominent manufacturers: Rowntree's, Schweppes, Carr's, Fry's, Huntley and Palmer's, Peak Friens, Coleman's. Wherever you looked, their names were prominent on posters, in shop window displays, and of course, on packaging.
Today we often find ourselves asking, why do we need all this packaging? Is it really necessary? And indeed, when you look back, how do we ever get into this pack age anyway?
Well, for centuries, the provision merchant had bulk purchased his flour, rice, dried fruits and other groceries in crates and sacks. The grocer then had to weigh out the amount requested by the customer and wrap it up. Tea was blended to each customer's individual taste, and coffee beans ground on the spot to be completely fresh. It was all very labour-intensive. However, in early Victorian times, the public were increasingly worried by the unhygienic conditions of many grocers, and by those unscrupulous shopkeepers given to padding out their produce with spurious additives, as can be seen in these pointed caricatures. "O scheming grocer, with what little care you do plunder us and then go to prayer. Adulterate our coffee, sugar and our tea, our pepper, our mustard and everything you see." Quite early on, laws were being introduced to prevent such misdemeanours. These included weights and measures, trademarks, patents and copyright regulations. For instance, as far back as 1750, a royal patent gives the medicinal product, the balsam of life, the authority to use this distinctively shaped bottle, as it says, in order to detect counterfeit. This was the point at which manufacturers started taking control of their own products, pre-packaging the amounts they knew people wanted. It allowed them to ensure products reached the consumer in the right condition, undamaged, untampered with, and untouched by hand. And by producing individual packs, they created a means of communicating directly with the customer. Promotional puffs, testimonials, recipes, and other messages could be put on each container to extol the virtues of its contents. Virtues like purity, superior taste, or health benefits. Now, manufacturers were able to reassure the customer and engage with them in the way grocers had done before, a relationship based on trust. A good example of this evolution can be seen in the tea trade, where grocers and merchants were notorious for adding spurious substances to make up the weight. And this illustration from a children's book makes that point perfectly. What a naughty old man he must be to chop a birch broom in the tea. As far back as 1826, a small tea merchant called John Horniman decided to sell his tea only in pre-weighed sealed packs. By the 1850s, his reputation for consistent quality was growing.
However, at this time, grocers resisted this new concept of pre-packaged tea as it undermined their professional status as tea blenders. Luckily for John Horniman, chemists were more used to the idea of selling pre-packaged goods. And so to begin with, this packet tea was mostly sold by them.
By the 1880s, grocers were getting used to the idea that their stores were being filled by a variety of pre-packaged goods. And so many other brands of packaged tea came onto the market. At this time, the cooperative stores began selling packet tea, and tea prices were dropping to levels affordable by all. and so a stream of new brand names appeared. Some exotic, such as Maserati, others named after their owner, like Thomas Lipton, who by 1900 was selling 1 million packets of tea a week. And so the traditions of tea parties and afternoon tea spread through every home in Britain, with the Cooperative Wholesale Society filling 1/3 of the nation's teapots by the 1930s. By the end of the Victorian era, the public were getting used to these packaged brands, both upstairs and downstairs. It was now that brand names rarely began to proliferate. A single manufacturer would often make a vast range of products, and so had to devise new images and names for each creation, especially with products like tobacco and cigarettes. Wills, for example, produced brands like Three Castles and Westward Ho. Players, meanwhile, were busy choosing such delightful names as Charming Bells and Our Heroes. Wills manufactured the first 2 mass-produced cigarette brands, Cinderella and Wild Woodbine. Woodbine's pack design became a familiar image that remained unchanged from its launch in 1888 right through to 1960. By the 1950s, smoking amongst women was widely accepted, and more filter-tip cigarettes were being introduced.
I think as far as smoking was concerned, it was just part of the furniture. Everybody smoked. So I was surrounded permanently by a sort of fug.
To my shame, I used to smoke when I was young. Players' Weights, they were poor man's cigarette. They were smaller, but they were cheaper. And I think Woodbines.
I remember when I first started smoking, I could only afford a brand that was called Richmond, and you could buy a box of 10, I think, for about 15 pence. And when, on occasions when I had enough money, you'd buy a box of Consulate Menthol, and you thought that was, so cool.
My early memories of cigarette brands are probably Sobrani, different coloured cigarettes, and if you took a girl out, you tried to match her dress with the cigarette you gave her, pink dress or blue dress, whatever. But before that, there was these oval cigarettes called Passing Cloud. They were fun. We thought we were so big, but we weren't really.
Probably the strongest cigarette I can remember was Capstan Full Strength. A friend of mine used to smoke them, and in those days, if he offered you a cigarette, then you'd offer him a cigarette later on. The thing was, if I started the day with one of his Capstan Full Strengths, I could never taste anything else because they were just so strong.
Descriptive or evocative, memorable or imaginative, a brand had to create its own distinct identity, as well as its own visual connection, so the customer would always recognise it. Bovril, which came to Britain from Canada in 1886, quickly established itself as one of those instantly recognisable brands. This was helped by the distinctive shape of the jar, which soon became synonymous with meaty goodness, forging a strong bond between customer and brand. In the case of HP Sauce, the familiar Houses of Parliament emblem has provided a reassuring visual continuity since 1903, despite being forced out for a while in the 1940s when the label shrank as a wartime economy. In the 50s, the image returned and the colours were made more vibrant for the self-service era. The key to success for so many brands has been their consistency, building a relationship between brand and buyer. Once established, this combination of colour, shape and visual identity instilled a glow of confidence in each and every pack, and the images ingrained themselves in our minds, often for life. Of course, brands had to encourage a wary public to try out their product. For this reason, grocers were able to provide samples and even give away sample packs. Brand names were also evolving. To begin with, products tended to have the same name as their manufacturer. Soon, however, brands began trying other, less familiar names, made up to sound a bit more exciting and energetic. Another idea was simply to add the letter O to the end. Now, how many of those can you think of? One well-known product, initially called Robertson's Marmalade, soon became known as Golden Shred, with the Robertson's name being given less prominence. And indeed, Golden Shred became so synonymous with marmalade that the word marmalade itself was dropped. Brands give us something constant in a world that's forever changing. They become like friends. We trust them, we rely upon them, and they give us comfort values. Indeed, they have become part of who we are.
My father used to come home from work, and on the station they used to have machines with little bars of chocolate. And when I was the only child, I got a penny bar of chocolate. To this day, I still adore chocolate.
When you look back, it truly has been a revolution. One that has changed our culture and lifestyle out of all recognition and given us a standard of living that continually improves. Ease and convenience have often been the main attraction. In the 1850s, for example, Cadbury's cocoa paste was the new, easy-to-make product. 1 teaspoonful in a cup, add boiling water, and a cup of the finest flavoured cocoa or chocolate is instantly made. Another groundbreaking product was Dunn's Essence of Coffee, that could be made in just 1 minute. Imagine that! No more grinding of coffee beans. In terms of affordable nutrition, Liebig's extract of meat offered the perfect addition to all kinds of dishes. Pioneered by the German Justus von Liebig in the 1840s, it came to Britain in 1865, and by the 1890s, annual sales numbered 8 million jars. Promoted for use in every kitchen, as well as on military campaigns and polar expeditions, it became a global success, inevitably leading to many imitators. So in 1899, a snappier name for Liebig's extract of meat was devised, Oxo, now available in a stylish glass jar. And then in 1910, the even more convenient Oxo Cube was launched. There were many other brands of meat extract, in both fluid and cube form. Verox, Exox, Torox, Beefex, Bifty, Vimbos, Vigorul, Juvis, and of course, the mighty Bovril. Another breakthrough at this time, in 1902, was Marmite, a vegetarian equivalent. Brands like these, manufactured in their thousands, were more affordable to the masses and cheaper to make than goods from more traditional, localised industries. This was the basic principle of the pack age: mass production in vast factories, high quality standards, and promotion to a mass market through the medium of national advertising. Distribution also took place on a national scale, using an efficient railway system and a growing road network. In 1823, Robinsons patented their barley product, which became popular for making superior barley water in just 10 minutes. Later, tins were used to give this powdered product a much longer shelf life, and the brand remained on sale right through to the 1950s. During the 20th century, competition for these orange and lemonades was becoming intense. Lemon barley crystals was the next step for Robinsons. The crystals dissolved more easily than powder, making a better drink. Wizard. However, a pre-prepared drink that only needed to be diluted to taste was even more convenient. And as these became increasingly affordable, more big names moved into this market. Robinsons launched their own bottle version in 1935, beginning a long association with Wimbledon. From this time too, the enduring character of Old Heathers served as a reassuring image of the brand, appearing on the label and in promotions. Of course, handy, ready-to-drink options in metal cans, Tetra Pak cartons, and individual plastic bottles have proved popular in our increasingly on-the-go world. A popular convenience food was dried soup, something that was being promoted by Benjamin Piper as far back as the 1770s, and he was proud to brand each cake with his own name. By Victorian times, the biggest brand was Edwards Desiccated Soup, to which you simply added boiling water. But there were scores of others, like Lazenby's and the Portable Food Company. Burn Fire, Cauldron Bubble, Splendid Soup, no trouble. By the late 1940s, Pom instant mashed potato had arrived. This was well before Smash, which launched under the Cadbury name in 1967, and is now fondly remembered for its cackling Smash Martians and the jingle, "For mash, get smash." Another vital part of our national nostalgic heritage are those standby ready meals that were such a hit in the 1960s and 70s.
There just wasn't fast food, there wasn't takeaway, and there wasn't much choice of foreign food. And then Vesta came in with these kits where you could make your own.
A modern meal in a packet, a foreign meal, something like chow mein or a chicken paella, something like that. My mother was against packet foods, and my father certainly wasn't going to touch anything that didn't have meat and 2 veg. So we felt very adventurous, almost rebellious, certainly very modern young things.
There was also pot noodle, launched in the late 1970s, and for the man with a kettle, it proved the perfect instant meal. Let's not forget that so many advances in our eating habits have been due to technical innovations. Everything from Victorian apple peelers and food mixers, right through to egg slicers and the Kenwood chef. Refrigerators enabled the introduction of a vast range of chilled and frozen foods. And the cooker has long been the mainstay of the kitchen, increasing our ability to be creative. But of course, they all had to be cleaned. The 1980s saw convenient cooking taken to a whole new level with the microwave. Virtually instant food on demand. When we think of instant drinks, we naturally think of instant coffee, and that was a big phenomenon of the 1950s. That having been such a success, they tried out instant tea, but that never really caught on and still hasn't caught on. And that was because the tea bag was so successful. And with a nice cup of tea, you want a biscuit. Now there's something that goes back 800 years. For centuries, there had been ship's biscuits and army ration biscuits. But it wasn't till the 1840s, with the addition of sugar, that fancy biscuits emerged. As manufacturing increased in efficiency and the price of raw materials came down, so their popularity grew. By the end of the Victorian era, the luxury biscuit was a popular treat for many ordinary folk with their afternoon tea. While the well-to-do had cooks to make their biscuits, shop-bought biscuits also flourished, weighed out by the grocer from colourful labelled tins. From the 1870s onwards, there was a growing excitement for decorative Christmas tins filled with biscuits. These made ideal presents, with the tin serving as a pleasant reminder of the gift and a useful container when empty. Biscuits were the last major commodity to resist the trend to pre-weighed packs. As late as 1939, 75% were still being sold loose. However, it was a self-service store that finally made it inevitable that biscuits would be pre-weighed and pre-packed before their arrival on the shelves.
I must just show you these. These are biscuit catalogues. This one by Huntley and Palmer's, perhaps the most prestigious biscuit manufacturer at this time. And we're talking around 1900. And here in this book, produced by the manufacturer for the retailer to select from. So the traveller, the salesman, would have taken these around. And, of course, by this time, 300 varieties of biscuits. He couldn't possibly take those all with him. So the book was here to guide the retailer into what he might want to buy. And just look at the variety here. The excitement must have been unbelievable. The detail, the shapes, fabulous. And if you look here at Peak Freen's catalogue, slightly different design and style, but again, the wonderful shapes, the character biscuits, the zoological biscuits, and all kinds of wonderful names, very creative. Sylvan Vanilla, Chalet, Baton, Stella Iced. And then the packaging. The packaging is superb. Look at the colourful designs. And some of these designs, in fact, they date back to the 1850s. It's glorious. It's terrific. Exciting.
When you opened a box of the Huntley and Palmer's biscuits, they were all set out beautifully, and in between each biscuit was like a waxy paper which was corrugated, and made it even more exciting choosing which one, because they looked so beautiful.
I can remember buying they were called Huntley and Palmer's breakfast biscuits. They looked like a rusk.
The ones that really come back to me are the Lincoln biscuits, because they would just have the top surface full of knobbles on them. So you'd break them, you'd watch how the biscuit broke and how many knobbles you got on each side of broken pieces.
And let's not forget the excitement of a chocolate biscuit, a treat that certainly dates back to the 1890s. But it was in the 1920s that a vast array of individual foil-wrapped chocolate biscuits emerged, with names like Cinema, Charleston, Cyclist, as well as the one that still remains with us today, Club. By the 1930s, the popularity of chocolate biscuits had grown rapidly to include Penguin and Blue Riband. The austerity of the 40s, though, took its toll on the number of brands, and by the 1960s, the selection had dwindled. But of course there was still the wagon wheel, which had arrived in 1954.
When I was younger, I really actually loved school, and wagon wheels are part of the lunchbox. They're the good bits. They're the bit you wanted, but you sort of saved till you've eaten the rubbish bits, which were the sandwiches. So yeah, wagon wheels are all about that, and they fit just the right size, the width of the lunchbox.
You see, biscuits, and especially chocolate biscuits, have so many fond memories attached to them. But then again, there were broken biscuits. And how much fun do we have rummaging amongst those?
Broken biscuits were made up of leftovers from the large outer biscuit tins, not quite good enough to be sold at full price.
Yes, I can remember going to school, and there was a corner shop, and it used to sell broken biscuits.
It was a very traditional shop in that it had a counter, and you had to, tell the shopkeeper what you wanted, and he went over and he got it for you from the shelf and put it on the counter. But the broken biscuit display was actually on the customer side of the counter.
And it was put on an angle and it had a glass lid so you could see what was inside. And we used to buy those because they were very cheap.
I used to be a Saturday girl down in Woolworths and Lewisham, and I was on the biscuit counter, and we sold quite a lot of broken biscuits, and people used to ask for them, so I did my best to accommodate them if there weren't many left. Broke a few up for them.
Biscuits may have kept us going in between meals, but in the 1920s and 30s, as we became more aware of our health, vitamin became a buzzword, rather like the word organic is today. So at this time, crisp breads like Ryvita, Darvita, Macvita, Nuvita and Vita Wheat were arriving on the scene, along with B-Max, described on the tin as providing the maximum natural vitamin B. And there was an increasing awareness and understanding of nutrition and diet. By the late 1950s and into the 60s and beyond, a much wider range of slimming foods were being developed, and our calorie counting began in earnest.
Well, like most women, I've always tried to slim and tried different things. None of them worked, so I bought boxes and boxes of these limits biscuits. It's like everything else, if you just live on biscuits, you get bored silly with it. So I ended up eating them as well as my dinner and my pudding and everything else.
By the 70s and 80s, we all knew that low fat and reduced sugar were a vital part of a healthy lifestyle, and so more products focused on this newfound awareness, with brand names reflecting our quest for a slender figure. Back in 1890, the health of wheat germ was at the heart of Hovis, so named from the Latin strength of man. This was a brand new name, far more memorable than the previous Smith's patent germ flour. Many other flours were named after their creators, such as McDougall's, Coombs, and Allinson's. But the trend was towards specially created brand names that built an emotional connection. Branding apart, the big innovation for bread was a loaf that was wrapped. Why wrap bread? Well, as these early 1920s wrappers state, because it is about the only food which prior to eating is not washed, peeled or cooked. This loaf was wrapped as soon as it was baked. It comes clean and fresh from oven to home. Discriminating housewives appreciate this hygienic innovation. But it was sliced bread that rarely ensured the need for wrappers. First used in America in 1928, bread slicing machines came to Britain 2 years later, whereupon Mother's Pride could promote their bread as wrapped sunshine. Later in the mid-60s, the traditional waxed bread wrapper began to be replaced by plastic bags. Flour, of course, was the basis for many party treats. Biro had been born in 1910, and by the 1930s, that recipe book was being published in greater quantities than any other book, apart from the Bible. And the next best thing since sliced bread might well have been packet puff pastry, which arrived in the 1930s. Well before that, a boon for the busy housewife was the convenience of pre-prepared powdered products in a packet. Everything from sponge mixture to bun flour. For homes that could no longer afford a cook, this new concept of ease, no eggs to buy, no eggs to whisk, and all made in 5 minutes, was a temptation. And often the adding of a fresh egg or two was all it took to preserve Mum's feeling that she'd done something herself. And if you were really short of time, the ready-made cake was the ultimate convenience, pre-packed with all the trust of the brand. Lyons, known for their tea shops and nippy waitresses, developed their extensive range of cakes and pies, from cupcakes and tartlets, to Swiss rolls, choc rolls, and the much-loved individual fruit pie. So here again, we see one of those moments. The mass manufacture of cakes in large bakeries, mass-produced in hygienic packs and at affordable prices. And the adverts made them look so enticing. Another great convenience product was breakfast cereals. These began in Edwardian times and started to replace the endless porridge and the occasional fried egg. But it was the accent on convenience which was so important. I mean, just look at grape nuts. They came in around 1900 into the UK as a fully cooked, pre-digested breakfast food. And don't forget, don't try to cook this food. It was already pre-cooked. And that was it. Straight from the packet into the bowl. Force arrived in 1902, and now this great character arrived the following year, Sonny Jim.
And they used to have this little jingle about high o'er the fence leaps Sonny Jim, forces the food that helps raise him.
The joy was that you could send in for the actual fabric, printed fabric of this character.
And I remember my mum sent those away, and I had one of those for Christmas.
In 1922, Kellogg's arrived on the market with cornflakes, all bran, and then in 1928, Rice Krispies. But shredded wheat, which had been imported for years, found the demand strong enough to build their own factory in Welwyn Garden City, and shredded wheat was manufactured in the UK. Britons make it, it makes Britons.
I think they were made by Wellgard, the shredded wheat, and there was always a picture of the factory on the actual box. That I always found fascinating. What is this building? I'd love to visit it. It looked so amazingly exciting.
Shredded wheat packaging is totally different now, but one time you used to pick the top of the box up, then there was a layer of cardboard, you took that off, and then the shredded wheat were there.
Weetabix arrived in 1932, and Quaker continued to produce new brands. Here we have puff wheat arriving with Shirley Temple saying, "This is my cereal." During the war there was a ration of corn, so Kellogg's produced enough wheat in the UK to produce wheat flakes. Toasted, of course. The war also saw restrictions on the use of cardboard and inks, which meant the packaging was less familiar. In the 1950s, the big innovation was sugar-coated breakfast cereals, brands that we're now very familiar with, like Frosted Flakes, now called Frosties, Sugar Ricicles, and indeed Sugar Puffs. Now, Sugar Puffs were promoted by Jeremy the Bear. Now we know the Honey Monster from 1976. Tony the Tiger was there, and Noddy. Now, Enid Blyton's Noddy was a familiar figure, and many other companies used Noddy to promote their products.
At the table, snap, crackle, and pop.
Other characters to appear on pack were Snap, Crackle and Pop. They'd been hiding behind for many years, and now in the 50s they started to make themselves well known. A favourite for children, of course, and the market blossomed. But the most extraordinary thing was now starting to happen. Competitions, offers, cutouts and free gifts, of which perhaps the most famous was the atomic submarine. There it is, free inside, a model sub. And here it actually is. You would look forward to this moment of rummaging around trying to find it before somebody else did. There's the offer. Doesn't that look exciting? And then you've got this little pack, and out of it pops your little bit of plastic magic. This one's red.
I think when I was a child, my favourite breakfast cereal was Sugar Puffs.
Oh, you grape nuts.
Bran Buds. Golden Nuggets were just the best cereal ever, just completely sweet and sugary.
Yeah, favourite breakfast had to be Ready Brick. It was, I always remember the adverts on the TV where you had the orange glow around you to protect you for the rest of the day.
I actually really believed that there was a boy running around suburbia who was bright orange, with a bright orange glow. I thought that was real and really cool, and I wanted to be him.
Scots porridge oats, I'm sure it was definitely bought because of that Scotsman on the front, the delicious Scotsman, all very strong with his kilt flying. I'm sure there was something going on there between the Scotsman and my mum.
I remember my brother loves Sugar Smacks. That was his favourite. I wasn't that keen on cereal. I suppose Frosties were exciting, especially when my father told us we had a new person living with us and we had to go upstairs and meet this person. And it was a model of Tony the Tiger that he'd achieved from somewhere in Liverpool.
This is Tony the Tiger. Childhood memories. They're great.
And in some ways it wasn't the cereal, it was the toy inside, even down to the point of actually getting my parents to buy ones I didn't like, just for the toy.
You used to go to the supermarket and then really look along and see which ones had the gifts in.
Everything was holograms in the 80s. You had little hologram alien cards. Or those lenticular pictures. You had like a dinosaur and then you tilted it and it would show you the nearest living thing to whatever dinosaur was on your card. And those were, you know, the sort of playground collectibles of the day.
I used to feel very sorry for my parents because they used to have to stock up with so many of these boxes so that I could just have all this fleet of vehicles all over the table.
There are lots of candidates for the ultimate convenience pack, but the tin can perhaps has a better claim than most. Out of season and preserved for longer, canned food was truly revolutionary in its time. By the end of Victoria's reign, cans of food for picnics, along with out-of-season fruits, and cheap salmon from America had become part of the larder. Here, for example, this 1890s advertisement implies that cans are acceptable in all social circles. In reality, though, like many shop-bought products, such as jams and cakes, the use of canned food was widely frowned upon. By the 1930s, housewives loved the convenience of cans, particularly as a standby meal. Like so many things we take for granted, we forget how significant the can's widespread use has been, transforming our ability to keep all manner of things for longer, ready for use at any moment. Since their invention, canned foods have played a major role in our weekly shop, and the act of opening a can is an integral part of the kitchen scene. A million housewives every day pick up a can of beans and say, "Now where did I put that can opener?" Luckily, more and more cans today have the benefit of a ring pull. For many people, though, it wasn't opening the can that mattered, as opening time at the pub. Pubs and taverns have been a refuge and a meeting place for centuries, an integral part of the British way of life. Yet, however sober this idyllic picture was, the beer and spirits industry was going through its own revolution. During the second half of the 19th century, individual beer bottles with paper labels started to be made, and breweries began to promote their beers while proudly showing off their premises. Indeed, as the size and stature of each brewery increased, these magnificent, massive red brick monuments to industrial progress became modern wonders of mechanized marvelry. By the 1890s, chilling and carbonization techniques had been incorporated, along with mechanized bottling. Stacks of beer barrels, not always stacked terribly well, were dispatched via the ever-expanding National Railway network. London's Courage Brewery had already occupied its spot by the Thames for some time, when Tower Bridge was built nearby in 1894, a status symbol that the brewery incorporated into its advertisements. Some brewers created non-alcoholic beers to cater for those who had joined the temperance movement, pledging to abstain from all intoxicating drinks. As bottled beers were distributed all along the line, similar changes were happening in the spirit trade. Colourful labels were appearing on bottles, which were now cheaper to produce after the end of the glass tax in 1845. These labels date from the 1860s, 70s and 80s, before the branding of spirits had been fully developed. The gin distilleries of England were now growing in size, as were the whisky distilleries of Scotland and Ireland. The innovation of blending whisky served up a lighter taste that appealed to English and overseas palates. As sales rose, so these whiskies developed their own brand identities. In the 1890s, dewars used a scene in which Scottish ancestors reached out for a wee dram. Buchanan's black and white Scotty dogs were a familiar sight, and White Horse, which had been available since 1861, finally began using a white horse as its mascot. In 1909, Old Highland Whisky was relaunched as Johnny Walker, with its striding character created by the artist Tom Brown. After the horrors of the First World War, there were of course still plenty of traditional drinkers, but the bright young things wanted to party. And from the mid-1920s through to the 30s, cocktails were all the rage, the very thing to get you in the mood. Whether it was spirits or Schweppes, the search was on for that cocktail look. And along with the party scene, a veritable host of tasty nibbles appeared. Football wafers, twiglets, cheeselets, and every type of cocktail biscuit variety through the 1930s. For many in the 1950s and 60s, the home bar was the trendy way to make a statement, entertain your friends, and try out new drinks, like Baby Sham or Cherry Bee. At this time, miniature spirit bottles were being enthusiastically collected, many brought back from the far-flung corners of Europe as the excitement of a continental package holiday became popular. For some, the party scene may have looked relatively tame, but under the surface, women were letting their hair down, or so the advertisers would have you believe. What was it going to be? A baby pom? A pony? A golden Godwin? Or perhaps the idea of a Schweppicure?
Doopy-doopity-doo-wah, doopy-doopity-doo-wah, doo-ba-dee-doo-ah-dee-you, ba-doo-ah-dee-ay.
For a long time, the appeal of women has been a major advertising theme, and eye-catching ads became the norm for promoting drinks.
You're the vodka in my lime, the subject of my daydreaming time. You treat me badly, but how I love you madly.
But in this age of rock and roll, I guess all we really wanted was a fling. America's Coca-Cola took off in Britain during the 50s, and so did its sociable rival Pepsi. Britain's brave answer to this invasion was Kitty Cola. Enticing, but not quite enough. The idea of buying your beer in a can must have come as something of a surprise, particularly as its shape looked similar to the cone-top tins of metal polish. The first brewer to try out this new can was Wellenfol in 1936. Here is one of a number given out to guests at a wedding, as a novelty, along with an opener, of course. By the 1950s, beer came in the cans we now recognise, and by the 60s, fizzy soft drinks were also available this way. The next surprise was a giant beer can containing 4 pints, to be followed a few years later by the classic Watney's Party 7.
Watney's Party 7 was 7 pints sold in a can, and if you were trying to gate crash a party in your sort of later teen years, it was sufficient ammunition to have a Watney's Party 7 under your arm.
And it would be welcomed along with all the other Party 7s that were in the corner.
The type of opener for a Party 7 was a triangular shaped device that used to put an air hole in one side, turn the can around and open this side.
And they tend to get a bit fizzy in the car. I just met Stephanie, my future wife, and I was invited to a party around her house, and I got to her mum's living room, opened one of these cans up, and the whole thing exploded. The beer went all over the ceiling, all over the new carpet, and we lost about 3 pints of the 7 pints there.
That's it, mate. Get your priorities right. Lager was the trendy taste of the 1970s and 80s, especially with those titillating tenants' girls. But come the 1990s, it was the phenomenon of the bottled alcopop that stormed in with an appealing range of exotic names like Barking Frog, Lemonhead and Hooch. A bottle is not only a convenient container, but it also guarantees the contents haven't been tampered with, such as being watered down. Bottled milk gives us the same benefit and goes back to Victorian times when homogenised milk was sold in bottles. It was very much a luxury then, but so often it was at the luxury end that these innovations began. Ordinary milk, by contrast, was delivered by cart in the street and then poured from a churn into the customer's own jug. During the 1920s, more and more dairies were going over to bottled milk. It was, after all, much more hygienic, and they had this convenient little inserted cardboard disc which was easy to take out and replace. And then for schools, children had this third of a pint.
At school, at break time, we used to have small bottles of milk. You pressed the little round cardboard out, put your straw in, and drank it.
And when it was cold, very cold, the milk used to be icy, and it used to pop its top. And so we used to be able to put them on the radiator at school until the ice melted in the milk.
And then in the mid-1930s, the aluminium foil came in. It was, again, even more hygienic and easy to take off. I can just demonstrate this 1950s gadget which took it off so cleanly, and of course then easy to replace and put back into the fridge. And in the 1950s, wax cartons were replacing milk bottles, and finally the plastic was now taking over as well. So eventually we'll see the demise of the traditional glass milk bottle. That's sad. Most of us will remember these wonderful waxed paper straws from the 1950s, 60s and 70s, and maybe even the arrival of the flexi straw. But why are they called straws? Well, before then you went in and bought a packet of drinking straws, and they were literally corn straws, natural straws. For those lucky enough to afford a fridge in the 1950s, the ability to keep meat, milk and yogurt fresher for longer, and drinks cold, was a revelation. It also enabled exciting innovations like bird's eye fish fingers, which arrived in 1955. And while fridges themselves didn't seem to change all that much, what we put in them was changing, and fast. By the late 60s, Tupperware was the wonder storage container, and the yoghurt market had exploded to such an extent that it was no longer simply flavoured, but now had real fruit bits. Yoghurt had been sold as early as the 1920s through health stores in earthenware pots. But it was in 1963 that Ski launched their Bilberry Swiss recipe yoghurt, opening the floodgates for every imaginable flavour.
I remember loving Ski yoghurt. We always had a pudding of sorts, and pudding suddenly became Ski yoghurt.
When we were children going to the seaside, we used to have yoghurts in little baby glass milk bottles. They were absolutely fantastic. And then yoghurts became big business. And the ones I liked the most were called Choc Top yoghurts. The chocolate on the top was like solid. You could sort of break it in half almost and peel it off, eat some of the yoghurt, and then eat the chocolate topping later.
Fiendish Feet yoghurts were yoghurts that came in little plastic pots with feet, and that's what counted. It was almost a toy, and there were kind of 8 different ones. I used to have them all lined up.
Gosh, no, I had them. I remember them. And I remember particularly having the toffee flavour, and that was always quite special because yoghurts, that sort of thing, were normally the fruit flavour. And perhaps Mum had decided that I needed a bit more encouragement to eat the yoghurt, so having something with a silly face on and these weird feet meant it was a bit more interesting and encouraged me to have one a bit more.
Fiendish Feet were a product of the 1980s, although losing their feet in the 90s meant changing the name to Fiendish Faces. But of course, it was the feet that were fun, and so the brand lost its appeal. But mostly, people rarely connected with their pudding treats, whether Bird's Eye Mousse or Angel Delight, first whipped up in 1967.
If you had people around, you'd have Angel Delight, and it would be kind of, ooh, Angel Delight. It was the same way that Viennetta was for a while. Butterscotch was by far the best Angel Delight flavour. That was the one people always enjoyed.
When Mum got more adventurous and was willing to accept these instant meals, she would take them perhaps on holiday if we were self-catering, and butterscotch was always the favourite. But my very first introduction to Angel Delight was when I was given a small glass dish containing the banana flavoured Angel Delight with a glacé cherry on the top.
I remember Angel Delight being sort of served up as a treat, and sometimes I seem to remember my mother would make a trifle, sponge trifle, and somehow Angel Delight would be served alongside with it.
I always remember it as the comfort food when I used to get home from school and have a big bowl of Angel Delight.
You'd slice the banana first, put the banana at the bottom of the dish, then put your Angel Delight on top. Or you could actually sort of layer it if you were feeling, excited.
Well, Angel Delight was posh instant whip, really. Instant whip was the first one for us. And that was, it was very frequent in our family. I suppose you could make it go a long way.
I'm definitely not an Angel Delight person, but instant whip was a big thing because when my mother discovered it, we seemed to eat nothing but instant whip.
Indeed, well before Angel Delight and Instant Whip, there had been a long tradition of puddings made from powders. The powders themselves were made from corn flour, and a wonderful variety of moulded creations magically transformed mealtimes. Time after time, these easy-to-make yet exciting desserts never failed to please. How proud cooks and mums must have been to present such architectural wonders. Beef suet pudding was another favourite, with the most famous brand Atora, launching in 1893, displaying its trademark image of bulls pulling a wagon. By 1930, the complete pudding in a packet came from Lyons. So easy, you just add water and steam it. And of course, with something like that, you also needed custard. For most of us, that meant Bird's custard powder. This was the innovation of Alfred Bird, a chemist who, because his wife suffered from an allergy to eggs, created an eggless mixture which he began selling in the 1840s. Birds became well known for their range of exciting puddings. Even Dad could gain favour by bringing home the brand. Custard in powder form became increasingly popular, and because it was so easy to make, by the 1920s dozens of different brands were vying for our attention.
I liked the skin that was formed on top. There was a lovely sort of skin, and I always actually tried to get as much of the skin as I possibly could.
And along with custard, there was jelly and blancmange, pudding treats we don't see as much of today. Jelly's golden era was filled with names like Chivers, Hartley's and Rowntree's. The idea of cubed jelly was another one of those little convenience moments, arriving in the mid-1920s.
If we had visitors to tea, perhaps we'd have a blancmange and perhaps a Rowntree's jelly. And you'd put them in the moulds.
A white rabbit mould, blancmange, and it used to be nested in a green jelly representing grass, and that was a birthday treat.
We used to eat ice cream on Sundays after Sunday lunch, presumably because my mum had had enough cooking, and we didn't have a fridge at that stage. In fact, I was quite grown up by the time we had a fridge, and it was my duty to run to the little local newsagents, which opened at 3 o'clock again on a Sunday afternoon, buy the ice cream, Neapolitan, have it wrapped in newspaper, and run back as fast as I could before it melted.
I used to go and buy the ice cream from the shop, and to make sure it stayed cold by the time you got home, I used to get the newspaper out, wrap it all up very tightly, and then you'd have to try and get home as quickly as you could.
I don't know why that was thought to keep it so fresh, but that's what happened.
There was a smaller block or a larger block, and we had to divide it up into 5, which again is unbelievable by today's portions.
Isn't it amazing how these brands and products conjure up so many forgotten personal memories? They're triggers to our past, and then we find they're common to so many of us.
Arctic rolls, they were a mysterious surprise in a way. We couldn't imagine how it worked, how you could get the ice cream and the sponge all at once. And I think my first experience was actually at school, in school dinners. And, we really thought the cooks had pulled out every stop to get this almost magical food. And then to discover that my mum could also buy it in the supermarket for a special occasion, perhaps. It was groundbreaking.
Always remember you used to have to take it out of the freezer, for about 10 minutes before you could actually cut it because it was so hard.
Arctic roll was my all-time favourite ice cream dessert until Viennetta came along. But with Arctic roll, I always used to pray not to get the end piece, because then sometimes the ice cream and the jam didn't go right up to the end. I think I normally got the end.
Before most of us had fridges, the treat of an ice cream could be something really special. In late Victorian times, the Italian ice cream vendor was an established part of the street scene, selling his penny licks. More affluent ice cream lovers could make their own in a revolving drum in just 5 minutes. And for day trippers, there was a growing number of tempting ice cream parlours. But it was the arrival of edible ice cream wafers, cups and cones in the early 1900s that spelled the demise of the unhygienic penny lick that had simply been washed in a pail of increasingly murky water before being used by the next customer. The convenience of the cornet made ice cream so much more popular. And in 1922, Wool's, well known for their sausages, launched a range of ice creams, swiftly followed by Eldorado and Lyons. Walls had developed the novel idea of selling their ices from pedal tricycles. Initially just 6 were deployed, delivering to homes. You put a card with a large W in the window, ensuring a delicious home delivery of cold ice cream. By 1939, there were 8,500 of these Stop Me and Buy One tricycles.
Oh, yes. Yes, Stop Me and Buy One. The man used to come round on his tricycle.
And they had snow fruits.
They were triangular cardboard with an ice, I suppose you'd call it ice lolly, and there was a water ice inside, and they were fruit flavoured. And if you were really rich, you could buy a snow cream, which was the same, but it had a kind of creamy substance. I suppose it might have had milk in it, I don't know.
You could get half of one for a halfpenny. A whole one cost 1 penny.
And we used to push it out from the bottom and then bite off the top. It was gorgeous.
And let's not forget the arrival in the 1920s of the chalk ice, and around 1930, the 99, with its Cadbury milk flake. An ice lolly in the 1960s, 70s and 80s meant a space-age encounter with Zoom, Orbit, Fab, Whiz, Skyray, Kinky, Whopper, and the new soft, creamy taste of Funny Faces, and plenty more. Oh, that really has put me in the mood for an ice lolly. In fact, since we're about halfway through our journey, maybe it's time for one of those intermissions. Now I'm thinking a chalk ice and a packet of crisps. Now where is that twist of salt? Wonderful cup of tea. And indeed it was the tea manufacturers who were so good at encouraging us to keep on buying their tea, because they knew about that natural instinct of ours to collect tea cards. It's those Brook Bond cards that most of us remember. They arrived in 1954, and when the promotion ended in 1999, a staggering 7 billion cards had been issued.
When I was small, I remember we always had packet tea at home, and it always had to be Brook Bond, and you always had these cards, and you could stick them in an album. I think they used to have different series which would change every so often. It would be, exotic animals.
And the whole collection that I avidly went for was wildflowers. And I think this was sometime in the 1950s.
I was quite irritating to the household because I kept encouraging my mother to buy more and more tea. And she did actually say to me at one point, "But you don't actually ever drink it." No, I said, "But you do all the time. I want the cards." And sometimes we'd have at least 6 packets and all the cards I would take out.
Tea cards were first issued in Edwardian times, with themes like Tower Tea's series of sayings. But it was Taifu tea that really made them a feature, beginning in 1913 and continuing through to the 1930s. Then from 1955 to 1973, these cards were printed directly onto the sides of the carton, ready to cut out. But how did all this collecting craze begin? It was the tobacconists way back in the 1750s who first harnessed our instinct to save things by printing jokes, riddles or rhymes onto their wrappers. It must have seemed quite a novelty to get something extra with your penny's worth of tobacco. And of course the retailer hoped you return for another. And that was the fundamental idea, to encourage brand loyalty. From the 1850s onwards, grocers were printing their wrappers with series of pictures, scenes from around the country, or images of famous people with facts about their lives. In the 1850s and 60s, perfumers like Rimmel started issuing almanacs for shops to give away to their favoured customers. Just imagine the added prestige of using the very latest technology, of quality colour printing. Now the floodgates opened. As colour printing became cheaper, so a deluge of promotional items were designed for grocers to give away. From calendar bookmarks and dainty pocket diaries, to three-dimensional novelties and decorative cards, many of them being eagerly gathered by children to put into their scrapbooks. Liebigs produced one of the first series of collectible cards in complete sets of 6. First issued in Europe in 1872, these colourful cards soon came to Britain. Then it was the turn of Coleman's, who in 1885 began adding beautiful colour labels to their starch boxes, issuing them in series of 4 or 6. Hundreds upon hundreds of series were produced, and the era of children's pester power had begun, as Mum was badgered to buy more and more. Soon, most starch companies were adding pictorial labels. The ultimate issue was a series of 32 to commemorate the coronation of Edward VII in 1902. Cigarette cards were the next craze to spread rapidly through the nation. In the 1890s, companies like Wills and Players began issuing stiff picture cards to protect the cigarettes in their packets. Initially, these were printed with miniature advertisements. But the chance to tap into our collecting compulsion was too good to miss. Soon, picture series were being created that locked customers into the brand. Cigarette smoking was proving more convenient than pipe smoking, so as sales of cigarettes increased, the number and variety of cigarette cards really took off. Children were much in evidence, cadging off adults to build up their own collection. Card series covered every subject imaginable, from the natural world of flowers and animals to topical themes like motoring, cinema and sporting heroes. The information on the backs of these cards gave detail and life to their subjects, and their succinct facts and insights were often considered to be as educational as any schoolbook.
My parents both smoked, so I used to be quite excited every time we bought a packet to fill up one of these little books and collecting all the different well-known people, film stars, and we had swaps, obviously. You know, if you couldn't get one, somebody else had one.
And I had an album full of cigarette cards with all the different dogs' breeds in, and they're quite educational because I learnt all the names of the dogs, the breeds. I wanted a Dandy Dinmont Terrier, which not a lot of people have heard of, but that was my favourite card.
Another popular form of promotion was the coupon. The idea of giving gifts in exchange for coupons saved from tea packets began as early as 1878. Such teas became known as bonus tea, and a number of firms started to join the trend. In 1900, the tobacco firm of Ogden's began their own coupon scheme. By the 1920s and 30s, saving cigarette coupons was a powerful incentive, and the concept returned in the 1950s and 60s as competition between cigarette brands intensified.
My mother smoked so much that she was able to buy with Kensington's gift coupons. She bought my father a drill. She bought a rug for the fireplace, an armless chair, which at the time was called a television chair. But she got them all on Kensington's gift coupons.
Cocoa manufacturers added their own twist to the coupon scheme. Around 1900, Rowntree's began issuing tokens that could be saved up and then exchanged for a glorious decorative tin filled with their chocolates. By the 1930s, however, the gift catalogue with its wide range of goods was proving far more appealing, and so the gift tin promotion ended. Soap manufacturers weren't slow to pick up on the idea of gifts either. At the end of the 19th century, Sunlight and Lifebuoy were both giving away books and other prizes in return for wrappers. As ever, other soaps joined in the fun, offering everything from tea sets to tea towels. In fact, towels became such a popular gift that some brands only offered these. Also getting in on the act were numerous other companies, from the Sunshine Vitamins of Stalk Margarine to Oxo, whose gifts included footballs for boys and Betty Oxo dolls for girls, available for saving up 480 cube packs. So proud were they of their dolls, some lucky shops had one to display. So for generations, manufacturers have been encouraging our collecting instinct. It meant we were well prepared when the trading stamp phenomenon of the 1960s and 70s took hold. Green Shield stamps, pink stamps, co-op stamps, and so on.
I remember Green Shield stamps. When we were young, we used to go to Lipton's supermarket all the time and used to get the Green Shield stamps from there.
And as a treat, I used to be allowed to lick the back of them because I loved the taste of the glue.
That was always the treat, you know, when she came back from the supermarket. I think it must have been Co-op. She'd come back with those stamps, and it was always, that was what we did. Me, himself and my sister would tear them into strips and start putting them into those booklets.
We'd get the catalogue and go through the catalogue and decide what we were going to get. My sister and I used to take it in turns to decide what the treat was going to be from the catalogue.
Seeking the support of children, Cadbury's launched Cocoa Cubs in 1934. These were little creatures led by a boy called Jonathan, and for a few years, models of the Cocoa Cubs were given away in tins of children's Bourneville cocoa.
I remember Bourneville cocoa because I used to collect the little metal animals that came in them every time. But I used to get rather upset when I got a duplicate. I used to have to go around all my friends and see if I could do a swap with them, so I got a different one.
The cooperative store's answer to this was to put model ships in their silver badge cocoa packets, and children could save coupons for a harbour to float them in. Ovaltine built its popularity around the League of Ovaltines, launched in 1935 and promoted on Radio Luxembourg. Along with its newsletters, certificates and badges, there was the excitement of those secret signs, signals and codes. By the end of the 30s, membership had reached 5 million children.
Yes, I was an Ovaltine. The Ovaltines were on radio, or wireless as it was called in those days. And they used to have a special program and they used to have a song.
My father got Radio Luxembourg and we listened to it every I think it was on Monday nights, and we listened and we sang the songs. We are the Ovaltines, happy girls and boys. And they had special puzzles with code things in, which unless you were a member you couldn't actually get the answers to them. But I loved that.
And you could write in and you got a pack back with I think I had a badge or something.
Over the years, manufacturers have found lots of ways to capture children's interest. The Tubby Trex Club in the 1950s offered a tantalising mix of cards and toys as prizes. And in the 70s and 80s, children could enter the intriguing world of the mad Jaffa Cake eater. One of the most enduring characters, of course, was the Golly, adopted by Robertsons in the 1910s, appearing in adverts and on the back of their jars. From 1928, enamel badges were being given away for 3 tokens. But after the Second World War, children needed to save up more to get badges, pottery figures and other gifts. By the time the scheme came to an end in 2001, over 20 million badges had been issued. And that collecting bug continues today.
I used to collect these little circular discs in crisp packets called Tazos, and there was lots of different characters on them. And I can remember once I got 2 in a packet and I was over the moon. I absolutely loved it.
For those on-the-move moments, potato crisps were ideal. Frank Smith introduced his tuppenny bags in 1920, with a famous blue twist of salt being added a couple of years later. His timing could scarcely have been better, as getting out into the fresh air with a picnic was just a thing in your new motorcar. So successful was this Eat Anywhere product that by the 1930s, Smiths had opened 10 factories around the country. But it was the 1970s that saw the full potential of the crisp market flourish most flavoursomely.
Crisps were very much an important part of my 70s childhood, probably more than chocolates actually. But the ones I particularly liked were the horror bags, and you could choose between fangs, bones, and I think there was also one called claws. They were by Smith's Crisps, and the great thing about it was they were delicious flavours, but you also could save up the tokens and get lots of freebies from Smith. So I remember horror bags collections coming through the post.
There was a brand of crisps called Skydivers, and when I was about 4 or 5, all my friends used to get that at school at playtime at the tuck shop. And it was a great packet. There was a skydiver sort of lunging at you out of the packet as if he was plummeting towards you.
Ones that really spring to mind were rancheros. I think they were pork and bean flavour.
Football crazies. They're a small packet of crisps, like maybe that big rectangle shape, and they've got like actual football-shaped crisps in them. Genius.
Quavers, you know, I mean, they were fantastic when I was at school, and in the 6th form, you had to have your packet of Quavers during your break.
Yeah, you can't underestimate the power of crisps.
All those were crispy treats, but the ones most of us really looked forward to were sweets and chocolates. And you'd be surprised how far back some of those go. Toblerone, for instance, arrived in 1908. Milk Tray was launched during the First World War. And Crunchy in 1929. I bet you didn't know that. The 1930s saw an explosion of chocolate favourites, including Terry's Chocolate Orange and Apple. Mars bars had arrived from America in 1932, and a feast of others were filling sweet shops around the country.
Doopy-doopity-doo-wah, doopy-doopity-doo-wah, doo-ba-dee-doo-wah-dee-you, ba-doo-wah-dee-hey, ba-doo, I'm addicted to you.
Two brands that were available in family-sized tins, as well as boxes, were Mackintosh's Quality Street, launched in 1936, and Cadbury's Roses in 1938.
Mars bars go right back. They were always so delicious. But I remember cutting them up into little pieces, and they used to last about a week in the 50s. I mean, it's unbelievable now. And you'd have sort of maybe 2 bits, and oh dear, well, Shall I have a third? No, I'll keep it for the day after tomorrow or something.
I'm the only child I know who had to have their Smarties rationed. I was only allowed to eat 6 out of a packet at a time.
Smarties were one of my favourite sweets when I was young, and I'd see the Smarties tube on the side and then be hugely disappointed that we only actually got about 5 or 6 each.
And of course, we shouldn't forget the numerous sweet brands that have come and gone, such as these ones from the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. But sometimes they do come back.
Take me back to those good old days. Sweets and treats and jars full of heaven. Candy, tots, lollipops just for me. Take me back. Penny in the pocket just waiting to be spent. Do you remember when we stopped at the tuck shop, our eyes open wide, way back then?
Things that have disappeared for me that I would still enjoy to have around today are things like Cadbury's milk tray. A bar of chocolate that had different elements to it.
Bar 6, similar to a Kit Kat, I suppose, really, wafer in chocolate.
Oh yes, Spangles. Spangles were marvellous because they were only 3p a packet, so I could buy them as well as something else. And the choice seemed fantastic for a little girl.
I always remember Spangles, all the different colours. It was probably one of the first sweets that I tried. It was one of these things that you put in your mouth with Spangles and you start seeing you can suck them, and then you always have to crunch them at the end of it because you can't resist them.
Well, I remember Spangles were great. The whole seemed to melt so early on, which was a shame, and you were left with a sort of outer square.
I remember sweets in the very late 70s and 80s that were called, you still get Tutti Fruities these days, although they're not as perfectly square now as they used to be. There was a mint version called Tutti Minties, and it's almost as though they've disappeared off the radar. No one else remembers these things. I'm convinced Tutti Minties used to exist.
Pink Panther chocolate bars, strawberry flavoured bars in foil with a Pink Panther on the front, 2p a go, all through the 70s. I was a happy boy. Bring them back now, please.
Take me back.
It's those childhood memories that we rarely treasure. And it's funny how these brands can trigger the memory of so many different experiences.
If you had measles or chicken pox as a child, that was horrible, but you might get a glass or a bottle of Lucozade, but you went to the chemist shop to get it, and it was in that beautiful dimpled bottle. And transparent, you always remember it as being as orange as the Lucozade, but it isn't. It's a transparent bottle in crimply, in a kind of sort of plastic wrapper, which was the colour of the Lucozade. And as you were sort of feeling a bit better at the end of your illness, a glass of chemist shop bought Lucozade brought you right round, if I may say.
And I would get 2 tablespoons full of Viral, and my brother would get 2 tablespoons full of Radio Malt. I think I tried Radio Malt on one occasion, and I actually preferred it.
I don't remember eating Viral, but I do remember eating cod liver oil and malt, and I used to love that. And we used to have a spoonful of that in the morning before we went off to school, both my brother and I, because it was supposed to be very good for us. And luckily we both liked it, so we were quite happy to have it.
Bile beans sound revolting, but they were supposed to help you with your diet. I do remember the advertisements for them. They always had a terribly slim, glamorous young woman, usually in green cami knickers, respectable length, of course.
Used to self-medicate, you know, your Fenning's little lung healers and Carter's little liver pills and Sedler's powders, you know, for your stomach, and syrups of figs for you know what, you know. And actually I used to like that, and I once drank half a bottle and I wasn't off the loo for the whole day the next day.
In the 19th century, far less was understood about the causes of disease and the cures for ailments. Great trust was placed in the immense variety of remedies available, many of which claimed to cure everything. Before you even took any of these remedies, you were seduced by the power of the language, the promises, the hope, the reassurance. The impassioned testimonials seemed almost to have a curative power of their own. Madame Frane's famous magic mixture, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, Dr. Scott's bilious and liver pills. Page Woodcock's Wind Pills, Mother Seagull's Curative Syrup, Dr. William's Pink Pills for Pale People. All these remedies claimed the most splendid and all-encompassing list of cures for rheumatism, rheumatic pains, spinal complaints, gout and gouty pains, bronchitis, sore throats, neuralgia, pains in the chest, pains in the stomach, liver and spleen. It was little wonder that these concoctions collectively became known as cure-alls. And how is this for an enigmatic brand name? Wait and see liver pills. Perhaps the ultimate miracle mixture was Fleming's patent solidified oil, which was not only for the healing of wounds, but could also be used for polishing the floor, easing drawers, and curing creaking doors. The only thing it wouldn't do, as the advert clearly stated, was fry fish. As with so many things, tooth powder and toothpaste began as a luxury. Tooth powder, which you mixed into a paste yourself, was in use during the 1920s and 30s, although at this time many people were still using soot and salt to clean their teeth. But now toothpaste, sold in tubes, began taking over sales from tooth powder. Tubes of Colgate had come over from America in 1908. Another major brand was Gibbs dentifrice, which had built up a loyal following amongst children, who engaged enthusiastically with stories of ivory castles and giant decay. There are 20 fine castles of ivory bright, and they're cleaned by Gibbs fairies each morning and night. The 20 strong castles are all of them mine, and it's Gibbs' little fairies that keep them so fine. The tins were made from a silvery aluminium, and from the 1950s were issued in different colours, so each member of the family could have their own, blue, red or green.
They were lined up on the sink. My brother had red, his was on the left, red tin. Mine was next side the green tin and my sister had blue because they were our favourite colours.
And you used to take the lid off and then you wetted your toothbrush and you rubbed your toothbrush round in it and it made up a lovely big frothy thing and then you scrubbed your teeth with it.
When the tubes of toothpaste came in a big way, we all had to share the tube, which wasn't nearly as much fun. It wasn't as individual, although I hasten to add we still had our own coloured toothbrush.
It's extraordinary when you think about it how so many products start off as luxuries. When in 1901 Heinz baked beans arrived in Britain, they were described as exotic. And toilet paper at this time was a real luxury. So that's the pattern. They start off as luxuries, become necessities, and then one day you think, what would life ever be without them? In the early 1930s, the price of toilet soap was falling. It was now within reach of the wider public. Before that, toilet soap had been considered a real luxury, and many people washed using more traditional all-purpose soaps, which were also used for clothes. Palmolive had arrived from America in 1913 and was joined by Lux in 1928, and Lifebuoy toilet soap in 1933.
Lux, L-U-X, was the first sort of real beauty soap, as they called it. But who could afford it? You know, you could just look at it, you know.
Pear's soap I always remember, simply because it was my mum's best soap, and the girls weren't allowed to use it.
We often had Lifebuoy soap at home, and it has such a strong disinfectant smell.
It just smelled so clean, and after you washed it, you knew you was clean.
The Lifebuoy soap, I remember that being a cake of red soap, and it had this very clinical, industrial smell. It wasn't perfumed like today's toilet soap.
The more carbolic-y and the more vile it smelled, probably the cleaner it got you. That was the general idea.
Soap in its basic form had a universal application for many things, including washing your hair. But more and more specialist toilet products now began to emerge. As well as increased affordability, consumers responded to what they saw at the cinema, a glamorous world of immaculately coiffed and elegant women, courted by dapper, well-scrubbed heroes. As a result, the sales of shampoo, lipstick and perfume all began to grow. By the 50s, shampoo powder in sachet form began to be replaced by technically more advanced liquid in a bottle.
Well, if ever you asked Mother what she'd like, she'd always say, "Oh, Evening in Paris."
Evening in Paris was the scent. And I remember it being in a little blue bottle. It was, for me, it was very expensive. But the other one, which was slightly cheaper, was Californian Poppy. And I used to think they were terribly sophisticated.
Obviously I didn't shave as a young child, but I did use, when we'd go out sometimes I used to nick the old Brute aftershave from my dad.
Brute aftershave. That was sort of the first aftershave I remember by my father when I started work. So I think there's certain things like that that just really sort of associated with particular sort of times and events.
Aquamanda was the big toiletry range of the 1970s. It was heavily promoted, and for many the memories still linger on.
It was always Aquamanda when I was 14, 15 and just really getting into cosmetics. And Aquamanda just had this huge range. So I had the perfume, I had the soap, I had the talc, I had the bath oil. It must have been an overpowering smell when I left the house.
That amazing wrapping, sort of burnt orange and brown. And there used to be Aqua Citra, which was the lemon version of it.
The idea of giving toiletry sets as a gift had been established during Victorian times, but that rarely was only for the well-off. By the 1950s and 60s, however, it was a popular tradition for many. Jars of bath crystals and elaborate sets containing bath cubes, talcum powder and perfumes were a staple gift for mothers, wives and aunts. For men, shaving products were the equivalent. Novelty soaps were also part of this vibrant and colourful toiletry parade.
I remember my auntie always used to buy me at Christmas novelty soaps, and one year I had a Noddy and a Big Ears and a Mr. Plod in 3 different boxes, and I used to like them just to play with until my mother said, "You better use those up," and I very reluctantly washed with them in the bath, and I didn't like them getting smaller and getting out of shape.
Children are sometimes reluctant to wash, but things like novelty soaps and bubble bath could make bath time overflow with excitement.
Matey Bubble Bath was a bubble bath, but it was more than a bubble bath. It was a bubble bath and a toy. And then when it came to actual bath time, you'd have the bath with the bubbles. Yeah, and then have the toy to play with as well in the actual bath as well, which is, loved it.
So there's a quick glimpse of the ways in which we've kept ourselves scrubbed and fragrant over the years. But what about things other than ourselves? Houses like these were being built in early Victorian times, and these homes had plenty of room for servants. Servants, of course, had to clean these homes, but luckily for them, there was a new raft of products coming in. Knife polish, furniture polish, stove polish, plate polish, even urn polish. All kinds of wonderful labour-saving innovations were enhancing the performance of household chores and lightening the load of the domestic servant. Indeed, the firm of Cranes incorporated the phrase servant's friend to emphasise whose side they were on. Alternatively, words like quick, easy, reliable, lasting and economical always sounded encouraging. Advertisements depicted the retinue of servants who kept the bigger homes functioning, a never-ending routine of starching the linen and the shirts, collars and cuffs, and then the ironing, polishing and scrubbing. In 1894, the carbolic soap Lifebuoy was launched, adding to the growing range of disinfectant products that helped combat infections now understood to be harbouring in the home. And the next mission was to exterminate the bedbugs. However, during Edwardian times, the economic climate was changing, and there was a realisation that, thanks James, I can make it myself. And there was the newfangled vacuum cleaner that makes work easy, that startled the aged cleaner. What? Not want me any more, Mum? No, thank you. I can manage myself now. Things are on the change. Let 'em ring. While the rarely militant woman waged war with CWS brushes on all dust and dirt. But it was the outbreak of the First World War in 1914 that ensured the ultimate demise of the domestic servant. As the recruitment posters went up, encouraging men to enlist and women to join other services or work in the munitions factories, so the ranks of servants dwindled. Now it was the turn of the housewife to roll up her sleeves and get to grips with the brass and silver. During the 1920s, shop display cards depicted the new woman with her cropped hair, happy and at ease with her housework chores, polishing the metal, shining the brass, buffing up the grate, polishing her shoes, cleaning the linoleum and the furniture, especially her new gramophone. Washing clothes was a laborious process, but rushing to the rescue was Robert Hudson, who in 1837 started to sell his soap powder that had already been ground down. And as we can see from this early advertisement from around 1855, it was described as making clothes as white as snow in half the time. 10 years later, the same image was still in use, but now updated with the latest fashion. But even with the success of dry soap powders, solid bar soap was cheaper, and most soap was delivered in this form. When William Lever launched Sunlight Soap in 1884, he made sure he chose a name that would really enhance the image of his product. He was also the first to realise that by using a carton for the soap, it would be better preserved and wouldn't go rancid. And he had these cartons printed in colour. This dramatic change in packaging, combined with his ability to promote Sunlight more energetically than his competitors, gave Lever an immediate advantage, and soon Sunlight was selling around the world. And here is that box. Sunlight Soap, what a brilliant name. And look at the colour. It must have inspired people, given them confidence about the product. £1,000 reward given to anybody who could find fault with it? A guarantee that it was perfectly pure and genuine, and dealers were allowed to return purchase money? And look at this lovely little motto, less labour, greater comfort. That's exactly what everybody wanted. But then a new generation of soap powders started appearing, with more advanced cleaning methods. Omo in 1908, complete with bleaching agent. In 1909, the oxygen washer Persil arrived from Germany. And in 1910, Rinso demonstrated how their brand could wash your clothes while you slept. The soap war intensified in the 1930s with the arrival of Oxydol from America. For Persil, the theme was whiteness. Housewives exchanged their preferences for Rinso, while Oxydol proclaimed how good they were for washing colours, and even claimed to soak clothes 4 to 5 shades whiter.
Mondays was wash day, you know, and everybody did their washing on a Monday. And you had things like Rinso,
Persil, Oxidol. And then when they were all rinsed, they'd go through what they called a blue water, which was made with Reckitt's blues. That was supposed to make them look even whiter.
Yeah, Sunlight soap and Lifebuoy soap was always in a hard block. And my mother used to use that on the whites. I used to smother all the whites in this soap.
I can remember using Lux flakes and Sylvan flakes for washing the delicate clothes.
When I see the Robin starch packets, I remember my mother who used to starch the collars of my dad's shirts. She used to mix it up with water and then put it into a saucer and lay the collar into it and leave it overnight. And by the morning it was nicely starched.
I always remember my mother used to buy Daz washing powder. It was Omo and Daz were the two brands that she tended to buy. And I remember with Daz that you used to often get free gifts and you used to collect, like, for example, the table mats. So part of it was going along and then actually having to find the packet that had the table mat on it that you didn't actually have yet to make sure that you could get a set. So that was all part of the association with the sort of Daz brand and the washing powder brand.
Many soap brands claim to wash everything, from clothes to knives, forks and plates. Some scouring powders had a grease buster to clean the most stubborn utensils. By the end of the 30s and 40s, brands were increasingly emphasising their ability to do the washing up. Yet thrifty housewives still use the remains of toilet soap held in a soap saver and shaken around in hot water. So that's how we cleaned the dishes before washing up liquid arrived in the 1950s. In fact, the first washing up liquid appeared in 1948. Quicks, the quick sudsing liquid washer, claiming to be better than anything else for washing up. Many other liquids followed, like Squeezy in 1956 and then Fairy Liquid in 1960. For the past 200 years, archaeologists have been digging up evidence of many ancient civilizations. One of these was the Beaker people. 4,000 years ago, they were creating wonderful drinking vessels like this, and indeed their civilization was named after them, the Beaker culture. And here is our own throwaway equivalent, 21st century coffee cups. And you wonder, in 10 years' time, will any of these still survive? In 1922, when Howard Carter and his team finally stumbled across the tomb of Tutankhamun, they were thrilled beyond measure at this sumptuous window on the past. And yet, while they were doing all this, did they think for a second about the importance of preserving things from their own present day? I doubt it. Since then, examples of the first Smith's crisp packet, which came out at around that time, have all but disappeared. At school we're taught about kings and queens, about wars and great events, and this forms our core understanding of history. It's vital, of course, but so are the day-to-day experiences of ordinary people, because so much of history is in the everyday. Indeed, at school we are likely to be taught more about how the Romans lived than the daily lives of our parents and grandparents. Ours may be a throwaway history, but it's still of paramount importance. Like all history, it helps us understand ourselves and where we've come from. It's only by understanding the past that we truly appreciate the present, and so this insight really does help us to see into the future more clearly. Just look at some of the things that have disappeared. Liquid boot blacking, knife polish, starch, black lead, to say nothing of Britain's once vast match industry. Even candles have been rendered all but obsolete by the electric light bulb. The extraordinary thing is that we buy these products, use them, and discard them while giving little thought to their fascinating history, either where they've come from or how they've shaped our lives.
I think it's surprising how many of these brands do go back such a long time, back to the late 19th century or early 20th century. I actually thought a lot of those were there for me. They came out when I was growing up and came from my childhood. I didn't realise that my mum and dad, my grandparents had also had some of those as well. And I think that really is a surprising, and it's a revelation to me.
I suppose due to the advertising, you think that they're a modern product, and you can't imagine that people in the 30s were eating a Mars bar.
I couldn't believe that the Horlicks was running in the late 1800s. I imagined that was something that came out, perhaps in the 60s, when I remember my mother trying it for the first time.
Unlike ourselves, brands keep themselves looking forever young, which is why we imagine they don't go back all that far. Yet things often happen much earlier than you think. Here, for instance, we see the arrival of environmentally friendly products in the 1980s. The mention of organically grown wheat back in the 70s. And even further back in the 1920s, an awareness of no preservatives. Our journey has been made up of thousands of different stories, many of them seemingly trivial when looked at in isolation. But when you put all these pieces of the jigsaw together, you realise what an extraordinary consumer revolution this has been. Without this insight, we would take so many things for granted. Packaging, for example. That's something which is easy to dismiss as being so much rubbish. In reality, though, the packaging has actually prevented waste by protecting the product from damage all through its journey and into your hand. Otherwise, the energy of making and transporting the product would come to nothing, and that would be a far greater waste. Not to mention the inconvenience of having to find something to carry home your sticky treacle that had been dispensed by the grocer. This consumer revolution has fundamentally changed the way we shop, what we eat, and how we clean our homes. And now we have a huge variety of brands that see us through the day. Our world of brands really have become more like friends. They're essential to our lives. They reassure us in times of need. And if they disappear, we mourn their passing. Let's not forget how much benefit the consumer revolution has given us. An extraordinary lifestyle undreamt of 100 years ago. And in so many ways it's given us a more equal society, where the same quality products are available to so many more of us for so much less, where most of us can have the same sauce on our chips as the Prime Minister. You could even say, perhaps, that the evolution of the package had a greater levelling effect than the theories of Karl Marx. So next time you're about to throw something away, why not take a moment to think about everything it represents? Think about its place both in your own history as well as the wider picture of our consumer society. The combined effort, vision and creativity required to get these items onto your shelves day after day, week after week, may well be greater than sending man to the moon. So there you are. The history of your shopping may well be more interesting than you ever thought. Indeed, it's an insight into our consumer revolution. It evokes personal memories and connects us with our parents and grandparents. It's a vitally important strand in the story of who and what we are. And moreover, It's a brand new way of really understanding our history.
Take me back to those good old days. Sweets and treats and jars full of heaven. Candy, tots, lollipops just for me. Take me back. Penny in the pocket just waiting to be spent. Do you remember when we stopped at the tuck shop, our eyes open wide? Way back then, we loved the taste of sherbet, fizzy pop that made us run wild. Oh, what a time we had. What happy times were had. Take me back. Oh, look at that. Sweets and treats and jars full of heaven. Candy, tots, lollipops just for me. Take me back. Breakfast at the table. Snap, crackle, and pop. Do you remember when Mom put clothes on the line, dazzle and shine? Way back then, we dressed up for a party. How we loved our Saturday jive. Boys with their slick back hair and girls with their big behinds. Take me back, let's dream again. Sweets and treats and jars full of heaven. Candy, tots, lollipops just for me. Take me back. Hey, milkman, wanna give us a ride back in time when we fondly remember we are the Ovaltine happy dolls and boys. So please take me back to those good old days. Sweets and treats and jars full of heaven. Candy, tots, lollipops.